welcome to Today in Woburn. I'm your host, Samantha Stone, and I just said Woburn in the most Woburn way ever that I have never done prior. I'm not quite sure if it's because I've been a little crazy today and busy, but I am so thrilled to take a break from the day-to-day to talk with our guests today. We have three guests. Of course, we have our Mayor Scott Galvin with us, who's always very generous with his time and answering lots of general city business questions. We have Representative Rich Haggerty with us, and we're going to talk about a couple of important things that have been happening from a state perspective that supports our communities. And we also have Jennifer Judkins with us, who is the Director of Technology for our Woburn Public School System, which is a great follow-up to the conversation we had last week with Matt and Ellen Crowley. So welcome to all of our guests. I'm very excited to have you all here today. And Scott, I thought we could start our conversation today with a little bit of just kind of high five community news. I'm not sure if you've had an opportunity to see, but something that John Kinney started, and I may be mispronouncing his name, but he had gone over to help a woman, her name is Gloria, in our community, and who had a massive electrical problem. When he got there, he discovered that her home was in really unsafe conditions. And he has rallied the community in a way that I've not seen in a very long time. I think the last I checked, he'd raised over $60,000 to support revamping her home. And we also had a number of contractors and other people who were volunteering and coming in and offering their services to help out this woman in our community. And so I just wanted to sort of celebrate somebody really coming in and doing an incredible job.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. The house is in really rough shape. So it's nice that the community opens up and makes, donations to that cause. It's nice.
Yeah, it's really nice. I think it tells me a lot about how much everybody needed a good news thing that they could participate in and get involved in. So high five to John and the whole team and all the volunteers and everyone who's really changing the life of this woman and the community and increasing the community as well by improving the house and the landscaping and just making it safe for everyone.
Very nice.
Great. One of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about is there's been a lot of conversations when we've been talking about the school system and about teachers who need accommodations, who aren't able to come into the building and safely work for different health reasons and such. And I don't want to talk specifically about the school system here today, but I'm curious just kind of across the city, what our accommodations policies have looked like and how many of our city employees have asked to get those accommodations. So just kind of a general check-in about what we're able to do and haven't been able to do as a city.
On the city side, we haven't had, nearly as many as I'm hearing on the school side. That's for a number of reasons. But, the accommodations, the requests for the accommodations, there are certain criteria that you have to go through before you decide first of all, if the case is deserving of accommodations, there are instances where you just can't say, well, I'm afraid to come in. You have to meet the criteria which allow the city then to look into it and say, well, we can make accommodations or we can't make accommodations, or here's what we can do.
One of the reasons that I asked that question is we have seen a lot writing about accommodations and things around mask usage, even just as consumers, right, where you can go into the stores. And I was reading a really interesting article that showed that accommodation isn't always like if you can't wear a mask, some stores are saying that's fine. That's fine. We understand you can't wear a mask. You may have a medical reason. We're not going to ask you what that is. But our accommodation is not that you come in the store without a mask. The accommodation is we have curbside pickup and we'll make sure to deliver things to your car. So I think there's been a lot of stories circulating these days around different various things and wanted to just get a sense of, from the city, how we were doing it. It sounds like the demand overall was lower. Obviously, being in a school and a classroom is a little bit different than some of these other offices in terms of the amount of contact. And so we would expect it to be different in a school system potentially than other parts of the city.
It'll be much different. It'll be case by case, and they've got a human resources department that will be handling those cases. So we're interested to see how that goes as well, and continue to make progress with the the opening of the schools.
So our city offices have been open for physical visits of people coming into the buildings for a few weeks now.
Since
for a little
August
bit of
3rd,
time.
yep. Since
Yeah.
August 3rd without appointment, but prior to, it was, prior to that, we had been open by appointment, but now we're open to the public, regular hours,
Great.
and it's been going very well.
Good. I was going to say, I've heard really great things about that. And I've heard really wonderful things about early voting being very seamless and smooth. People are able to take advantage of that and are squeezing into, obviously we have elections coming up very soon this week.
Tomorrow.
Anything that you'd like to report on in terms of early voting or coming into the buildings and things that we should know about?
Yeah. Well, the early voting, it ended Sunday, and it was expanded by the legislature. Rich can tell you a little bit more about that, but it was expanded. Last year it was much more vibrant, and now with the mail-in ballots, now it's taken a lot of the onus off of the early voting. But I think you talked to Bill Campbell, we probably had 50, 60 a day, which was nowhere near the demand we had last year. And again, that's because of the additional means that have been provided to us by, Rich and the state legislature, which is really gonna drive voter participation up, with the mail-in ballot. So we're expecting numbers off the chart, not only for the primary tomorrow with the primary, but also with the general election. It's gonna be an incredible turnout.
That's great. I love seeing people get involved civically, and
Right.
and voting is one of the ways that we can do that. So I'm really excited to hear how many folks have we expect to participate. I think that's great. One last question for you, Scott, before I go. In the post sort of town hall meeting around the schools and such, a few people reached out to ask if we were, as a city, going to be doing anything to help support childcare for those people who have children in the hybrid school environments, but have work schedules that'll make it very difficult for them to do that. And I just wanted to throw that out there and give you an opportunity to share any thoughts you have.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, we've been working as a committee to identify, first of all, what local agencies can help in that process and what we can do. We're identifying different municipal buildings that might be able to be used. The two biggest providers that jump out right now are the Boys Club and the YMCA. And Governor Baker on Friday, as you might know, already know, Samantha, did his executive order that's going to expand. It's going to expand the ability for these type of providers, the early education providers, to now also provide services during the same time in school. So that'll help for those parents who need to work, two families that need to work, so we can accommodate. We're working on accommodating those most in need first, so we're really optimistic about that. We have, like I said, we've got the Boys Club in North Suburban Y that we've been working with. We've also looked at a couple different municipal buildings, and we were excited about using the Wyman School, the old Wyman. That's going to need a lot of work, and unfortunately, we don't at this time think that will be ready to take advantage September 22nd. But we've identified probably almost like 200 slots that we'll be able to provide, which isn't nearly enough, Samantha. I think the demand's going to be up around 500, where people are going to need some help with that. So we're really working hard to identify that. And there's a great committee that's that I'm working with the schools and some city officials. So, we're excited, and we're really looking forward to be able to help in that manner.
Great. Thank you for that update. I know people will be anxious and eager to hear whatever is available, and glad to hear that, we're thinking through those options for folks in town.
Most definitely. Yeah.
That's great. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us. You're always welcome to stay on, but I also happy for you to post. I'm going to invite Rich to chat with us for a moment.
Okay. Thanks, Samantha. Have a good week.
Thanks, Scott. You too.
Good luck tomorrow, Rich.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
I'm not sure. Rich needs a ton of luck, but certainly we want to give a good showing and show our support for you. So we're thrilled to have you.
Okay.
Great. Thanks for joining, Rich. There's a lot going on, obviously, around the state level. We haven't talked in a few weeks, and I've got a couple of things that are specifically on my list, but when we're done with those, please feel free to jump in with anything else that you'd like to add. I thought we might start with a little bit of the childcare conversation. Obviously, from a city standpoint, Scott was telling us a little bit about what we're trying to do to accommodate it. But from a state level, are there any additional things that might be coming down the pike in terms of policy or funding or anything that might support childcare needs for folks in the city?
Sure. So I think that there's ongoing conversations on that. You know, as the mayor said, there's clearly a substantial need right now. We know that many of our childcare facilities, particularly the private childcare facilities, have been enormously impacted by COVID and by the closings, of course. And some of those were able to avail themselves of the PPP or the economic injury disaster loan and some of those types of programs in order to help supplement some of those lost revenues. But I think the most recent number I saw was 163 childcare centers in Massachusetts closed, compared to prior to COVID. So we know that we need to provide greater support. I've been in communications with, Dean Solomon up at Social Concern, because of course they're a subsidized facility up there and they rely heavily on state funding. So we recognize the biggest challenge they have really is that because of the guidelines, the capacity is cut essentially in half. So if you had a child care center that was, offering, let's say 30 seats or something along those lines, they're now down to 15 seats. But of course, their costs have remained essentially steady, or in some cases, of course, have actually increased because of the specific guidelines relative to cleaning and everything else. There have been a lot of grant programs available to help childcare centers, provide further PPE options and cleaning supplies and things like that. I think that we're going to look at providing some financial assistance to some of the facilities that are actually subsidized programs. So we're going to definitely do that. But beyond that, I think that we've got to find a better way to prop up the private childcare facilities. And that's in part where I think the federal government needs to play a larger role than what they have. They have not released, as I understand it yet, the monies that they talked about back in May for childcare centers. And I think that they need to really step up to the plate and release some of those dollars, because we know that, providing childcare is an enormous issue for a lot of families, whether it's teachers, as we were just talking about, who are trying to, of course, teach from home or whatever the case may be. But really anybody who's in a situation where you've got, one or two parents who, of course, have to leave the home to go back to work and provide for their family. If they've got kids who are, under the age of 5, then they've got some real challenges there. So the state's continuing to look at it. I think more to come here, but I also think the federal government has to play a larger role in subsidizing some of these, both subsidized programs as well as the privately run daycare centers that we have.
Great, excellent. Thank you for that update. I do know that this is a real concern and challenge for families, and it's glad to see that we're trying to do as much as we can.
Yeah.
One of the other things that has come through as additional financial assistance for those who are unemployed and remain unemployed. It's not quite the same as it was before, but I thought it'd be helpful for you to help share with the community what's available and how they can leverage and access that funding.
Yeah, so the state of Massachusetts, let me back up. Let me just say that the additional federal dollars that were helping a lot of folks get by during the heart of the pandemic was $600, right? $600 additional per week. Typical unemployment is basically 50% of whatever your earnings were. So if you were getting typical unemployment from the Commonwealth, that was 50% of your earnings. And then on top of that, you were getting $600 from the feds. That went away. The additional $600 went away at the end of July in an effort to try to bolster folks' incomes and help them during these times. The state of Massachusetts provided an application to the FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Program, in order to basically help supplant some of those $600 that had went away. So the grant was issued back, I think, about a week and a half ago. And it's an additional $300 for folks who have been receiving pandemic assistance, which was the $600. So it's $300 for the first 3 weeks of August. So they're probably not going to get those monies until September, which I'm disappointed about. I've been vocal in my disappointment with the Division of Unemployment Assistance and their slow handling of some of these things. I've dealt with countless constituents on a lot of issues around unemployment issues. So that being said, we're continuing to push to make sure that these dollars that FEMA has authorized and granted the state to provide, that we are trying to do everything we can to get that in the hands of the people who need it as quickly as they can. And then, of course, beyond that, I will just say that, again, the federal government has a real responsibility, I think, within Congress to act again in order to provide greater assistance to folks who are unemployed, and also greater assistance to municipalities and states across the country who need further support with their budgets to make sure that they can continue to provide the services that people need at this particular moment.
Thank you. One of the things I want to talk about is at some point earlier in the response to the pandemic, evictions were halted and people were not allowed to be evicted. That time frame has expired. Are there anything related to housing, either that landlords need to understand there, or that renters who are struggling to pay their rent right now should understand about the changes back? I think we're back to our standard policies, or is anything else in place?
Yeah, no, so a couple of things. There was some legislation at the federal level on this, but the state level, we put in a moratorium on evictions and a mortgage forbearance a requirement where essentially banks would have to work with mortgage holders in order to help them through these challenging times. As part of that legislation that would have banned evictions and, again, given greater flexibility to mortgage holders, we gave the governor further authority to grant an extension of that program, which he did. I'm not going to get the date right, but I think it was the beginning of August for an additional 90 days. So that program that was in place, banning evictions and providing greater tools for mortgage holders to negotiate with banks, is now carrying through until the end of October. And we'll have to see kind of where we're at in the next couple of months. But right now, they do still have those tools available to them.
Okay, thank you very much. I hadn't realized it was extended, so I'm glad that we discussed it and let folks know that. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is the policing reform bill.
Sure.
There's a lot of, I think, confusion about what is being done at a federal level and what is being done on a local state level. And I thought we could just sort of clear that up, and you can talk a little bit about what's happening here in Massachusetts, what it includes, what it doesn't, and what the status is.
Sure. So a lot going on and a lot to talk about, but there's really been three proposals. There was the governor's proposal, which he announced with the Black and Latino caucus the beginning of June. There was the Senate bill the beginning of July, and then a few weeks later there was the House bill. So I'd specifically, I guess, like to speak to the House bill that I was most familiar with because all three have quite a bit of variables and a lot in them. The House bill included a commission for police standardized. Let's see, let me get the language right. The Police Standards and Training Commission, which would essentially provide certification and decertification for police officers in the Commonwealth. The certification process would take place over the course of 3 years. Other items in there were a ban on chokeholds, a duty to intervene, which was essentially a requirement where a police officer who saw another police officer doing something that was not appropriate, that officer would then be required by law to intervene in situations like that. One of the big changes within the House bill was changes to qualified immunity, which was, of course, a real hot button issue. Other things were changes around regulations for the use of tear gas and rubber bullets. And then, of course, some further changes around requirements for training, as well as, there was a change in status for the Commission on African Americans in Massachusetts, which was a good thing, which will basically provide the legislature a better tool to understand more about how different policy changes we might make may affect the Black and Brown community. So that was a good part of that legislation. I can just speak personally about some of my concerns around the legislation, to be honest. The Police Standards and Training Commission, the makeup of that raised substantial concerns for me. I felt that law enforcement officials should have been on that. They were not on that, neither the Senate or the House bill. which was concerning to me. I also had concerns around changes to qualified immunity, which again is essentially it's not so much it's really something that came through the judicial process, if you will. It's not really a pure law, essentially. But so those two changes really were concerns to me: the qualified immunity changes, as well as the changes around or the lack of involvement of law enforcement officials on the Police Standards and Training Commission. So we'll see where it goes. Right now, the bill is in the conference committee between the House and the Senate, 3 members on each, and they are trying to work out the differences between the Senate and the House bill. My hope is that they will put together a package that makes sense. I think everyone recognizes that we have to do something, and I think that law enforcement recognizes that this is an important moment to provide greater training and in many cases resources for our law enforcement officials so that they can be the best trained in the nation. We are really fortunate to live in a city and in a state that has some of the best police standardized training anywhere, including, quite frankly, the Municipal Police Training Academy, where former Police Chief Ferrulo is actually running. So we're really fortunate in that regard, and my hope is that we'll get a piece of legislation that makes sense for both law enforcement, but also tackles many of the issues that we recognize exist around some of the injustices that have occurred. And I'm hopeful that we'll get there, but we'll have to see where that goes in the coming days and weeks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And just for clarity, there is nothing in this that addresses funding for police departments, or is there?
No, so police departments are largely, and don't quote me on the number, but I'm going to tell you that, it's above 95% are funded at the local level. So that would be a decision for, a mayor, city council, select board, town meeting, those types of individuals who make decisions about funding changes that could or could not take place. The legislature, in large measure, does not deal with funding for police departments.
Okay, thank you. Should this pass, and if there are additional training requirements, which I expect there would be some level of additional training and certification, that would be funded by the city, or is that something the state is looking at funding as part of the bill that's passing?
So it's a great question, and the reality is that the answer is I don't know yet. But the truth is that the state should be required to pick up additional cost around training. If we're going to require training for municipalities, then the state should be responsible for paying for it. It would be an unfunded mandate if, in fact, for some reason we passed something and said that Woburn or Reading or some other community had to pick up the cost of those additional trainings. And some of these things we're going to do, or some of the things that people are talking about doing, are in some ways shifting resources with regards to, some training that's going on now. We may just move it from one bucket to another. So we don't really know, or at least I'm not aware of right now, anybody who's done a real deep dive analysis of what those changes may be and what those changes would cost.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. I just wanted to make sure that people understood what was actually in it, what was being discussed, and your point of view, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Before
Absolutely.
I invite Jennifer to the conversation, anything else that you'd like to update us on from a state perspective?
Well, I would just say that, there were 2 other big bills we did at the end of the session. One was, a bill around climate change and some additional requirements to get us to 100% electrical, renewable energy for our electrical grid by 2050, and a substantial investment in updating our electrical grid in the Commonwealth, which I think was a really, really great step in the right direction. It also included a $1 billion grant program, Greenworks, which would allow municipalities like Woburn to be able to apply for grants to, better enhance their readiness for some of the things that are going to come with climate change, and also things like, making sure that our buildings are more efficient and things of those nature. So that was a great bill. And then the second bill I would mention is the Economic Development Bill, which was about a $500 billion bill. $500 million bill. Let me get my letters right. And that was
that's a little bit of a difference, Rich.
little bit of a difference. Close enough for government work, I guess. But close to a $500 million economic development bill that made a variety of investments in economic development in the Commonwealth and in cities and towns across the Commonwealth that would have my hope is that we'll be able to legalize sports betting. There's some issues related to housing and permitting process, the permitting process in order to enhance housing in the Commonwealth that made some sense. And those two bills, I think, will go a long way towards getting us down the path towards progress. So I appreciate you giving me a chance to update.
Yeah, thank you. There's really important stuff going on. Thank you, as always, for joining us, Rich. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. So Jennifer, thank you for your patience. I'm so excited. We're going to turn our attention now to all things technology at our schools. Jennifer Judkins, for those who don't know, is the Director of Technology and Innovation. And perhaps we have never needed technology and innovation more than right now, as we're about to go into a new school year with a hybrid learning environment and remote learning options. So before we talk about all the sort of logistical things that go along with the situation we're in, I'd love to start with maybe talking about something you're excited about, because with the challenges, it also brings some interesting opportunities for us to be able to maybe experiment and do some things we've never had an opportunity to do before.
Absolutely. And I think that, there's a lot to be said for the teachers and how well they really sort of rethought how they were instructing students in an emergency situation. But I think we're all eager to do this in a more planned fashion moving forward, now that we know we're coming into the fall and having some sense that it will look different, and being able to prepare better for our families and to support our teachers more completely than we were able to in that emergency closure situation. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to help support teachers in their use of the technology. I think that this has really allowed us in many ways to accelerate the process of some of the updates and things that I had been talking with the superintendent about since I came on board back just about a year ago. One of the main goals that I had spoken to him about was the importance of providing more access to mobile device technology to our students and our staff. To see that happening much more quickly now as a result of some significant funding coming to our schools in support of the technology is certainly helpful in providing that more quickly to our staff. It's certainly needed now, but it makes sense in the long term. It's a great investment for our school community, because technology can really provide for some unique opportunities that aren't available without the devices. And I think that, teachers with technology are able to provide a more personalized learning experience, because you can do more with the technology to address unique student needs. Whereas in a whole class teaching situation, that can be more challenging in the absence of technology that allows you to sort of like distribute individualized assignments, for example, and assessments in a targeted way. That's something that technology allows us to do that would not be possible without it. And so those are the things that excite me.
Well, I'm really excited about those things as well. I think it's a tremendous opportunity. Of course, all of those things require that families have internet access at home. And I know in the spring, the city worked hard to work with some of our local providers to make sure that families wouldn't go without. What's the current status of that as that relates to the fall?
Yeah, so this has very much been a part of our planning, is thinking about how do we support families to ensure that they have internet access. So there are a number of programs and options available to families. One of the things that has been successful both in our districts and districts across the state is services through providers like Comcast that offer an Internet Essentials program, which is an internet service that is $10 a month, no contract required, no credit check, and they will allow people, even if they had previous debt, to come onto the service. If any of the family members, anyone in the household, qualifies for free or reduced lunch. We had staff working with families to assist them in the process of filling out those applications. But we also have some opportunity to provide some support for that $10 a month fee should families need it. That was something that was not available in the spring because there was no mechanism for us to sort of like pay that bill. And so we've engaged with Comcast to investigate the opportunity for us to provide essentially coupon codes, again, with families that are deemed in need for that type of additional support. So that's one thing that will be new and available. And we also have purchased some internet hotspots, because we know that there will be families that either are waiting for that Comcast service to come on board. We noticed that in the spring, where people would fill out the paperwork, and then of course there's a delay waiting for the service to be turned on and all of that. And so we don't want students to go without internet connectivity even for a day or two. So the hotspots will be available for checkout, and these are things that that we can control, provide filtering and things like that, but can be used on a short-term basis, kind of as a loaner, as they await a more permanent solution to their internet service.
Excellent, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the devices. So all the students will have access to a device. I think it's Chromebooks for older students and iPads maybe for kindergarten and first grade. Correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So preschool and kindergarten, we're purchasing iPads for those students. And then because they're developmentally the most appropriate device for our younger students. And then first grade and up will be provided with a Chromebook. So those devices, some of them are here and being prepared, and others unfortunately are on back order. We as many school districts have struggled with, despite placing orders back in June, are still awaiting shipment. So our intention is to, thankfully, we've been surveying parents just over the last actually week or so in terms of their return to school plans. And as part of that survey that we've required parents to complete for every student in their household, we're asking them to tell us if they need a device immediately at the start of school, or if they're able to wait 3 to 4 weeks for what we anticipate to be that delay in the back order. So we do have adequate quantities coming in, but we're trying to prioritize the distribution of those to the families that really can't go without. And we certainly noticed in the spring that many families tried to work with what they had at home. But as you know, when you have multiple family members, many working at home, then sharing a device becomes very difficult, which is why we've planned to purchase enough device. We have purchased enough devices for every child to have one issued by school. But fortunately, the feedback from families does look like we'll be able to provide those that need them immediately, and then give us that little bit of time that we need to await the shipment of the additional devices to provide those for the other families in the district.
That's great. And for is it your intention that at some point, when we have them all in stock, that families will be asked to use the school supplied devices to manage tech support or other concerns, or will it be up to families to decide what type of device they would like to use?
Yeah, so we have provided and will continue to provide families with support for their own devices should they choose to use them. Families can contact help@woburnps.com to reach any of our technicians. We're fortunate enough to have a Spanish-speaking technician that's been able to provide family support that are non-English speaking, so that was a big help in the spring. And then also, we certainly, if devices are available and it's easier for us to manage it, to help support a device that we have some control over, certainly. But if particularly the families that are virtually attending the virtual academy, should they have a device that they're using, it's completely fine if they want to use a device at home. Really, the only requirement is that device in the grades 1 through 12 be either a laptop or Chromebook or desktop, something that has a full web experience, as opposed to an iPad or a phone has more of a mobile experience. And so that would really have a different look and feel to that of other students in the class. And we want some equity around what websites look like and how they're experienced to the student. In the older grades in particular, students are going to be bringing the devices back and forth. And so we understand that parents may be comfortable with a device available at home, but not want that device coming back and forth to school. And so we'll provide parents with some options to choose if they want their child to have the school issued device and bring it back and forth, or if they'd prefer to have the school device stay at school for when they need it and the home device to be available at home. In the high school, we had planned prior to this COVID emergency, we had planned on a one-to-one program at the high school, so providing a device to all of our high school students. And so specifically in the high school, we're looking for those students to have the same device moving forward, but this year may be a little bit of an exception because of the nature of things. So generally speaking, moving on past this year, we would expect high school students to have the same device moving back and forth. And the other students would have them available in carts more traditionally when school is really back to normal after this hybrid thing sort of settles down. That's the long-term plan for our devices and our students.
Great, thank you for that update. Now, for those who need, who will be picking up devices from the school, certainly at least at the priority folks who need it right away, will those be distributed to hybrid students in the classroom, or will we be arranging alternative pickups for that?
So what we would probably do is we've been discussing providing a pickup opportunity for the virtual academy families from the Joyce Middle School, our administrative offices, because the general sense is that if a family is opting for virtual academy, they're likely to have more than one student attending at more than one school. So to have those families have to go to multiple schools is challenging. So we would offer them to pick up from here at the Joyce. And then certainly the students that are in cohort A, those devices would be available in school when they start. What we would try to do is make an opportunity available for the cohort B families who maybe need the device on Monday but aren't going to physically be in school until that Thursday, to pick them up from the school at a pre-scheduled time. So we'll be working with building principals on arranging that, and they would be directly communicating with families as to those scheduled pickup times from their school buildings.
Perfect. Thank you for that. One of the things that I think is always a challenge is student privacy and concerns around bullying and all kinds of things. And within a classroom environment, there's always challenges, but certainly within a remote environment, it's a lot easier to take a screenshot without anybody noticing than I'm going to be able to whip out my camera in the classroom. So I think the hybrid learning and remote learning environments could potentially introduce different kinds of risks and different kinds of discomfort. What will be our policies around students having cameras on and any other things that we've put in place to protect students' privacy?
Yeah, so I think about student data privacy as having sort of two pieces. One is really being thoughtful about what we encourage teachers to use, where there's so many wonderful applications available to teachers right now. It can be overwhelming as a teacher to know, well, what is, this looks really nice, but is this safe for kids? Does it meet the laws around student data privacy? And so we are, as a district, members of the Massachusetts Student Privacy Alliance, and that organization shares a common contract with over 400 school districts in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Our vendors are required to sign that contract, and if they do not, then we will not engage with them. This also includes free applications that teachers may access. And if they want to access them, we have them sign this contract, the vendors, and we maintain a list of all of those sites on our website under the Technology Department homepage. There is a list of online resources, and parents can look at any time to see what it is that is sort of allowed for students to be using, where it may be capturing student data. For example, kids are creating an account, and how do we know that that data is safe and that vendor is honoring all of the various state and federal laws around student data privacy? So I think teachers have really come to understand that. We've done a lot of communicating about this with our teachers, and we'll continue to do that, because ultimately they want to make sure they're doing, they're not exposing student data inappropriately. And so that helps give them a place to start. And if something's not available, they reach out to our department to investigate adding that resource. In terms of student safety around student data and what our expectations are with regard to students in terms of like the video calls, as you mentioned, we are going to be communicating with families. We have through our subcommittee work have developed some guidelines and expectations for students around what we're looking for in terms of online behavior, but specifically around those video calls. I've seen a lot of these come out in different districts, and some I think are a little over the top in their expectations about no drinks nearby, and it gets a little bit too intense. But we're really looking for, we do want to see students on camera. I think that's important because we want to see that they're engaged, be able to see with their facial expression if they seem to be getting confused or lost in a lesson. And so that will be an expectation. And this is also why we're offering devices to families, because we understand that families may have a device, but it may not be a device that doesn't have a webcam. And so we want to make sure that they have the ability to do that. It just is so important in building that sense of community in our classrooms when they are learning in a remote way. And so that will be one aspect. We also have some monitoring that we're able to do of student information. So we've since the spring, when we moved to this remote learning, and where we still will continue to have some significant remote learning happening, we have BARC installed on associated with student devices, or specifically with their use of the Chrome application. And so that allows us to, it flags, certain high risk sort of words or things that maybe need to be looked at. And so, we're really sensitive to making sure that that is really focused around student safety. And really the only person that's able to look at that information is our director of guidance, Rosemary Donovan, and she looks at that information and makes a decision about whether something maybe needs to be referred to one of the guidance counselors for follow-up and check-in with students. And so that's been helpful to know that we're able to see, again, through this dashboard, things being flagged that might indicate some high-risk behavior or concerns that, we just want to make sure, where we're not seeing students as regularly as we would normally see them, we have concerns over safety and their emotional well-being. And so being able to have this as another support has been helpful.
That's great. And for sessions where you might be seeing the school psychologist or other types of therapeutic environments where the information shared might be more private than you might get in a general classroom setting when you're talking about a topic and, as a class, those will be conducted virtually, or will those things be conducted in person? And if it's virtual, I assume those things will not be recorded, or how are we managing that stuff?
Yeah, so globally, we are not recording video sessions. This is actually something that, despite the fact that we have the ability to do so, we have purposefully disabled that as an option. We also, parents will be signing, as they did in the spring, a permission slip, essentially authorizing those small group or one-on-one sessions, because we want to make sure that parents are fully informed and understand that a one-on-one meeting may be happening virtually with a teacher and a student. And so those are things that we had in place in the spring, and we'll continue with that as part of sort of like the back to school paperwork and forms that normally go home. We'll be providing a digital version of that, which will include a parent authorization for those types of small group and or individual meetings with counseling staff and other support staff.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Two other questions for you. So one is sort of a logistical question for students who are hybrid, but I was thinking more remote. How will they be accessing books from the library and sort of library services?
Yeah, so access to text is a really big thing for us. We certainly want to make sure that students have access to texts that are of interest to them, right? So we already have mechanisms in place to make sure that they have access to their regular books that are required for school. So that could be a novel for whole class reading, where we order enough copies so that students can have their own personal copy, or ordering digital textbooks to supplement physical textbooks, just because we can't be sharing books in class, as a class set, as we may have been able to do at other times. So that's sort of one type of text, but really in schools, one of our big concerns is developing that love of reading with our students. And a big part of that is having access to texts that are of high interest for students, that they can sort of choose the things that are of personal interest to them. There are a number of different options available, and we continue to explore that, because I feel like you can't have too many choices for good reads, right? And so our teachers at the secondary level, so 6 to 12, are doing a lot of, are using things like Common Lit, and which is has some sort of short stories and poems and things like that. That's a free website that's in heavy use. And then we've purchased a tool called Newsella, And that tool is one that is being purchased for our middle school students, and that provides text for nonfiction reading materials for the social studies as well as the ELA curriculum. It's a really interesting tool because it allows for leveling of those texts. So within a class, I can assign the same story or article, but I can deliver that with different reading levels so that it's accessible to all of the students in class. These are the kinds of things that I think get me excited about the technology, because I think about how that wouldn't be possible in a printed version of a text in a traditional sense. And then I work very closely with the public library. I'm really fortunate. I think, you know, this community is so fortunate to have such just a very vibrant public library system. And so our school librarians and public library work very closely together. So we will be promoting the use of Hoopla, which is an app that's available through the public library that allows for checkout of up to, I think, 22 items at one time per user. And that includes chapter books for younger students, easy readers for our early reading students. And these are all available through their public library card, which they can get digitally now, as you know. So they're able to get that library card online. So we'll be trying to communicate that information out to families so that they can you know, get those additional reading resources as well for their students.
Okay, great. So just so there, I just want to make sure I'm super clear. There won't be any sort of in-school library time where I'm going to go and browse and select books to, you know, I say browse, but you know, sort of guided browsing.
Right, right.
Okay. All right,
Yeah,
great.
so we do not intend to open our library spaces. That doesn't mean that our library books won't be circulated. We are working through that, and so that could look like, for example, the librarians in the school spaces creating sort of smaller collections to deliver to a class where students could browse through in that smaller way and take those books, and then we feel like safely those could come back, sit in a return pile for a few days until we're comfortable that they're ready to be processed and recirculated. So it wouldn't look like kids coming in and browsing in the library, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't provide other opportunities for access to physical text, because our kids, and I think a lot of us, prefer a physical book to a digital book when possible. And I think we all are getting more than enough screen time, so it'll be really important to provide some of the access to physical books as well.
Yeah, I'm a physical book person, and
Me
I think
too.
I will probably never change that. There's something about the weight of it and the feel of pages in my hands that
Yes, right. And the success of seeing the pages kind of, you know, as you're getting through the
And
book, there's something very satisfying about that. Seeing the little bar move on my e-reader does not give me the same gratification.
It's just not the same. And, you know, flipping back to find something, I'll be like, oh, I kind of know, it was like this chunk of pages I can flip back. So it's nice to know we'll support that as much as we can. One of the things, though, that particularly I'm thinking for older students for this, not so much for younger students who are really learning to read, but audiobooks can be another mechanism. With the new technologies and some of the things we're doing, are any of those things being delivered in an audio fashion that students?
Yeah, so Hoopla, for example, which is the option I mentioned that's available through their public library card, that offers audiobooks as well as just digital books. And then we purchase as a district a really interesting tool called Read and Write for Google, and that's a tool that does a number of things, provides support for reading and writing. And one of the things that it does is it can do read aloud, even if you have a PDF document, for example. So students can play, whether it's a document that they've written and they want to sort of do a little bit of a review of their own writing, is one way we encourage the use of that. Or they have an article from one of these places like Newsella that we use, or just another website where the article is on the screen on a website or a PDF, and it will read it aloud. And it's neat because students can choose the voice that they're most comfortable hearing and set the speed at which it's read, and it highlights the words as it reads, which we know is an important support when you're, you know, in addition to audiobooks, which are great, having the reading highlight the words is a reinforcement of the site vocabulary. So that's a good resource as well.
Excellent. I love that. I want to talk a little bit about teachers and what we're doing, because you described, I think, is very real, which is there's teaching through remote means, whatever that may be, live instruction or things, is a really different experience. I know this from my own work. I can get up in front of live audiences and I teach a lot of workshops. Transitioning them to virtual, I actually have to really change how I look at body signals, what my pacing is, how I use things like breakups, how I get interaction with people. What are some of the things that we're doing to help our teachers prepare? Because this is hard, and I'm really sympathetic that, you know, I generally do it to a bunch of adults who may roll their eyes and, you know, give me a bad review, but ultimately they're not children whose minds I'm trying to mold and get them excited about learning. So the stakes are a little lower, right? Tell me about what we're doing to help teachers be ready for this environment.
Yeah, and you're so right. It is really different. And so one of the questions that often I hear from families or even our own staff is, you know, are we going to just set up so we can record teachers teaching, you know, with the live instruction and just stream that? And I'm, you know, I feel very strongly because I'm coming to this role as a teacher myself. And so I feel like I'm fortunate to have that lens about what it's like to instruct in a classroom and instruct online and understand, as you're pointing out, it's not the same. You would not conduct your teaching in the same way. So simply streaming it is really not, you know, fundamentally, it's just not the right way to teach in the exact same way as if you were teaching in the classroom. Like you say, you have to sort of think about chunking things out in smaller bits, providing opportunities for students to interact or check in with you. And so it's very different than just a matter of, let me just throw a camera on the teacher and call it a day, right? So we want quality instruction online. We don't want to just check a box and say, well, we did it. We streamed the lesson. We're all done. And so one of the things that I think is going to be helpful is we have had the time to, and fortunately the funding through many of the you know, state and federal government stimulus money around COVID support for schools, to purchase a number of programs that will help teachers to do the things that they do well, but in support of this digital environment. So some of the tools that teachers will come back to school with access to, and we will be providing training to them during those early, like, you know, we've got about, I don't know, 9 days before school starts to provide some very focused professional development time for them. And also providing support throughout the school year, because I think to assume that you just taught them right before school started and everyone's good is also not a very smart way to go about it. So the plan will be to provide some direct support and training on some of these new tools at the start of the school year, but also have some asynchronous opportunities or sort of learn at your own pace opportunities for teachers when they're ready to kind of take that next step with another new tool. And also, I did provide and will continue to provide drop-in sessions for teachers so that they kind of have on-demand questions. It doesn't fit a particular workshop or thing that's being offered, but just knowing that the door is open for them to just drop in on an open, you know, video call and just say, okay, so I did this today and it didn't work, and what can I do differently? And so I think that was helpful to teachers. The feedback was positive about that. And again, some of the tools just provide some real novel opportunities. So one of our concerns is, okay, I record a video lesson or I direct my students to watch this video. How do I know, A, that they watched it, and B, that they understood it, right? How do I know that as a teacher? And so one of the tools that would be available to our teachers is called Edpuzzle. And Edpuzzle does allow us to embed videos, whether it's ones that we create ourselves or that we find online, and develop pause points in the video that stop the video and prompt the students with a question. And they can't move on until they answer the question. And if they answer the question incorrectly, it moves the video back a short amount of time to allow them to rehear that concept or idea, and just to, again, to help them. And it provides great data for teachers so that they can see, you know, who watched it, what questions they got stuck on, so that when they do have that time where they're working in small groups or with students, they know how to focus their instruction. So collecting data in that way will be really helpful to teachers. And that's just one example of a tool that wasn't available in the spring that is going to be available to them for this school year.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's a great example. I'm so excited to hear about all these things. And I know that this is not going to be easy no matter what. And so I'm glad to hear that this isn't a magical wand that we wave and all things will work perfectly. We are building in checkpoints and mechanisms to learn as we go, just as students and families will also be learning with the
Exactly.
teachers. So, excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer all these questions. It was very,
My
very
pleasure.
helpful. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you'd like families to know?
No, I think that families have been very gracious in their patience and support of our teachers as they learn a new way of instructing, and I would just encourage them to be mindful of that and you know, continue to support their children and know that the staff are working very hard to try to teach in this new way, because I think we have a great group of teachers here. And it can feel really uncomfortable to then suddenly be forced to do your job in a very different way, but want to do it very well. And so I am really confident that they will do that. And certainly I want to do my part. Our team wants to do our part in support of that. And so, yeah, I think everyone's been really great, both on the family side and on the teaching side, and just trying to adjust to this new normal.
You know, one of the things that struck me about what you just said was I have always been one of those parents that perhaps over communicated with some teachers. Some teachers may have preferred a little less communication from me. Some of my students were very self-directed and independent, and I never needed to check in. I had a couple of students who definitely needed help, and the reinforcement at home was really important to their success. And so I would often use email. I imagine today, with a lot of remote learning, even if you're in the hybrid model, you're going to be electronically learning for good portions of your school week, that the tendency to reach out and to talk with teachers and to ask questions and want to understand might be higher than normal for families and parents. What are some good guidance we can do to have parents and families be involved, but not disruptive to the learning and the time that teachers need to be spending on developing curriculum and programming and working with those students individually?
Yeah, so I think, you know, as a mom and a teacher, I always try to first start with my student and sort of asking them, like, why don't you show me what you're working on? Or let's take a look at your Google Classroom to see what maybe is coming up for assignments, as opposed to maybe emailing the teacher first. So, you know, partnering with your child to be able to look at you know, fortunately, I think we've tried to standardize as we come into this new school year, the platform. So families that have students in grades 3 and up know that their students, really all of their learning takes place or sort of begins in Google Classroom. So for parents to, you know, we're working on creating videos so parents will know, what does that look like and how do I support my student in that? Because I know we're, you know, just as much as the teachers are learning new things, parents are as well in their efforts to support their children. And so in addition, and then Seesaw would be for our younger students. So those platforms have some ability to provide some communication to families. You know, I think as a teacher, I would say too, I would rather hear from a parent than have them be upset or stressed or worried about something. I would certainly much prefer they reach out to ask the question so that I can provide an answer. And I would expect that our teachers would say something similar. But to first start with my own children to say, okay, let's look at what's due. Let's look at what is, you know, what you've turned in and what the feedback is first. And then if you feel like the answer isn't there or is not clear, to reach out to the staff directly, because I think they'd much rather families feel supported and informed than maybe just trying to guess at an answer that may or may not be accurate.
Thank you. I think that's really good advice. And I think all of us as families should remember that while it's instantaneous to send the email, it isn't always instantaneous to respond to it. And they are, certainly in the older grades, they're supporting sometimes hundreds of students. That might be a little bit less this year in this new model, but certainly they have lots and lots of students and families that they're looking to support. So
Right.
to remind us that, I just want to say thank you to all of our listeners and watchers. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to our guests. I think this has been a wonderful reminder of all the people who are working very hard to make Woburn as best it can be as we go into a new school year, as we go into the end of our 2020 year under challenging times, but also some great opportunities to leverage grants and funding that's coming from other places and really apply that to ourselves. And as always, take care of each other.